Hi, this is Pat Moorhead, and we are here day 3 of the 6-5 Summit talking about security. Security is ever changing environment. I mean, we have hacking as a service, we have spy versus spy with AI, we have complexity inside of enterprises where, quite frankly, it takes them longer to integrate their security best of breed products and they end up being insecure. There's no better person I can imagine to be talking security than John Roese. How are you, John?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Good to see you. And gosh, you made a lot of announcements back at Dell Tech World. I mean, whether it's multi-cloud, AI, but you're also talking a lot more about security these days. And one of the big things that you talked about was zero trust. And I'm curious, how are you preparing customers for this, again, ever present, ever changing world of security with zero trust strategies? And maybe just for the audience, maybe just even talk about the way you look at zero trust.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I have a history and Dell also of kind of picking hard problems. This would not be the easiest problem to solve.
You
Let's,
are that guy.
yeah,
I've been following your career for a long time, and you do get the really hard stuff.
yeah. This one's definitely the hard problem in security because, think about it. Today we have. I don't know of a single customer in the world that I talk to that feels like good about security. They wake up in the morning feeling I will have no security event today. The world is perfect. I've done everything I can do.
It's
Um,
almost a no-win.
Yeah, it appears to be that way. And
Yeah.
so about 2 years ago, now just you remember, Dell had put together this growth framework that we now have been very public about. It includes multi-cloud and edge and telco. One of the
Yes.
pillars was always security. But
Yes.
we didn't really talk about it very much because honestly, we had to make a decision over the last couple of years. Do we want to participate in the security industry the way it exists today, or do we do something different? And what we
Right.
concluded very quickly is the current industry, well, it's fine companies doing good work, is not winning.
Right.
And so we asked ourselves, why is this the case? And it turns out that the real answer is we have the wrong architecture. We have built a brownfield security model from an era where security was entirely different, whether it was perimeter security or point security products. And that's kind of the state of the art. And so during the course of our going out and talking to anybody who would talk to us and learning what what people were thinking, it became very obvious that the only path out of this was actually a re-architecture. You had to rethink your security architecture. And then the question became, well, what is that future architecture? And the answer was just sitting in front of us. It was this thing called zero trust. Now, let me take a few minutes and kind of tell you what we think zero trust is because it's a confusing term. One, it is not a technical architecture. The most complex term in zero trust documents are things like policy decision point.
Right.
There's no protocols defined. It's not technology. It's a framework and a set of principles. But for us, it really boils down to three big changes that you have to do to build a zero trust environment. The first is from an identity management perspective, you have to go from a world where authentication is optional for things,
Right.
devices, applications, data, people, to a world where everything is authenticated and continuously authorized. There's no concept of an unknown entity. And that entity includes, again, devices,
Right.
people, applications, and data all need to be authenticated. They need to be there with a purpose that you know about. The second pillar is from a policy and controls perspective. As you may know, in the security world, there's three things that exist: the known good, the known bad, and the unknown. Those are the only three things that you have to deal with. The problem is today, we obsess about preventing the known bad and then watching the unknown to see if a known bad thing shows up and then preventing it. That is a permanently reactive posture. It will never win. Zero trust changes this and says, well, what if you just defined the known good? It
Right.
memorialized that, introduced it with policy, and prevented everything else. Sounds great. If you did it, just like authenticating everything, your security posture changes. And then the third is we have this weird disconnect between threat detection and our infrastructures. For instance, today we have this army of tools watching our infrastructures as if it's a needle in a haystack problem. The infrastructure is a haystack, and they're grabbing billions of telemetry events and hoping they find the needle, which is an APT or a particular problem. And so, in a zero trust environment, because you have this behavior where everything is known, policies define behaviors, your ability to detect a threat is anything that isn't that. It becomes very real time and very integrated into the infrastructure, which is a very powerful tool. Now, all three of those things sound great, apple pie and motherhood, almost impossible to do in a brownfield environment. And so what we announced at Dell was a bit of a direction. It said, we believe that in the security dialogue, the North Star we should all be heading towards is adopting these principles and building systems that do this. The challenge is getting from here to there is non-trivial. And so you're seeing two things at Dell. From a bottom-up perspective, more and more of our products, as we develop features in them, whether it's the authentication mechanism or the policy mechanism or how we deploy telemetry or even our services, we are building them to be functional components in a zero trust architecture. They aren't zero trust because that's a system level problem yet, but you see more and more our choices about who we work with, how we implement our technology are all about, okay, if you want to get to zero trust, your infrastructures have to participate. That requires you to do certain things. That's part A. The bigger announcement is we also realized our job in the world sometimes is not about a product. It is about the integration of the products and the ecosystem together to achieve an outcome.
That's
That
right.
sounds familiar. That's Apex. That's hyperconverged. That's our
Right.
telco business.
Right.
So in this case, what we announced was a project called Project Fort Zero, which started about a year ago with a dialogue with the US government that basically shared with us their approach to zero trust. They had built a reference architecture. Now, it wasn't implemented, it was just there. They kind of did all the hard work. This is how you'd put it together to achieve 151 functions and 40
Sure.
requirements. And it's a very comprehensive architecture. But when we talked to them, they said, well, this is what we want, but nobody sells it to us. We
Right.
can't buy it from anybody. And we said, well, we know how to put stuff together. And
Right.
turns out a lot of it's Dell componentry. So we agreed to build a team and to incubate a technology strategy around this and to basically operationalize that zero trust reference architecture into an offering. And
Sure.
so that's what's going on right now. Now, it's a journey, but what the end of the journey looks like, which will happen sometime later this year, is a implementation of a known functional zero trust architecture built by very smart people that is now a validated reference architecture and an offering. And what it will show up as is effectively a zero trust private cloud, a unit, an atomic unit, not of a
Right.
product, but of an infrastructure that operates fully compliant, certified against this zero trust model. And that, for the first time, says in your multi cloud strategy, you as a customer potentially could say, I will have 10 clouds I use, and maybe one of them will actually be a full zero trust environment. And then using application migration and workload migration, and you'll be able to move your most critical resources into that environment. That will require effort, but once they're there, the security posture of that environment is radically different. So, punchline is what we concluded is the only logical path for the industry to go is to basically move into zero trust aggressively. The only way to do that is at a system level, not a product level.
Right.
And we happen to be a good vehicle to kind of get that ecosystem organized. By the way, it's us and 30 companies in
Right.
that ecosystem to build it and to turn it into something that can be consumed by the market. So consider us essentially an acceleration vehicle for an architecture that everybody
Sure.
wants.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can usually predict what Dell is going to come out with. I did not predict this one. And Dell operates security protection at multiple levels. Even back in the good old days with SecureWorks and how that was integrated in. But this was a definitely a new one for me, and I think it's exciting. So I'm going to be tracking this all along the way. There was also talk about how you're working with the Department of Defense in there, and I know that when I was at Dell Tech World, that definitely I looked up at the slide when I heard this. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that zero trust reference architecture is an artifact that was created by various government agencies. Some, mostly the three-letter ones that you know, but also the Department of
Right.
Defense, because the DoD has a very clear understanding that in their world there are two kinds of conflict. There are kinetic conflicts and there are cyber conflicts.
Right.
And kinetic, we're pretty good. We have a pretty good military. We have advanced weapon systems. We're
Right.
probably going to win those if they happen. Cyber, not sure. We have very good offensive and defensive capabilities, but why chance it? And it turns out that if you aggressively adopt zero trust within any organization, including the military, you have radically changed the hardening of your infrastructure, the ability for it to be attacked in a way that gives you against people who aren't zero trust an unfair advantage. So for them,
Right.
they've released at the administration level, there's a national policy encouraging and actually saying it will eventually not be optional that people have to move into this space. DoD has been much clearer. They've released an entire strategy that they're executing around migrating their existing infrastructure. They actually had a very large task order to the public clouds to say, we would like you to build essentially dedicated instances for us that meet our zero trust requirements. That'll be a
Right.
bit of a journey, but they're probably going to do that. Those are called commercial clouds. And then there's a third course of action, which is the private hybrid, and also the edge and tactical edge clouds. That's where we sit. And so it turns out, in this big push by DoD to get from where they are today to a wide adoption of zero trust to increase their cyber defensive posture, they need industry to line up against it. And while the public clouds have lined up and mostly committed to go on a journey to try to make a public cloud zero trust, very
Right.
hard to do, but it's possible. And we're actually working with them. We signed up to basically say, we'll take your reference architecture, we'll industrialize it, and we'll give you a viable path to basically put into production your course of action 3. And again, we have a very good relationship with governments around the world, including the U.S. government. They're big customers of ours. And it's funny, your comment about this surprised you. I'm glad, because occasionally we should surprise you. You know us well, but it's nice that we did this. But the reason this is so appealing to us, like every one of our other growth directives, is it is very adjacent to what we do. It is about infrastructure.
Right.
Zero trust is not about a security product; it's about secure infrastructure. The second is, because of the embracing of this architecture by people like the U.S. government and various governments around the world, you have a ready market fit. You have a reference architecture that technologically fits that, and you have market, technology, and customer fit are all already in place. If you want to go pursue a market, trying to invent customers or develop the technology or kind of shape it with respect to the market, that's hard to do. This one, there is already a market for it, but there's no supply. There are customers that want to do it yesterday, but they can't get it from anybody. And from a technology perspective, Fort Zero doesn't invent anything new. It's just the integration of it into a new architecture that it behaves in a certain way. And so that's a very kind of interesting path, which that's why it's moving so fast. And for a year into it, we're pretty happy about this. Hopefully by next year, it won't be called a project anymore. It'll be
Exactly.
an
Well,
offering.
I mean, this is how it goes. We go from project to a product that people can buy. So I want to shift to the future. And part of any CTO and what they do is, it's funny. I always say, as an industry analyst, I have the luxury to look into the future. And as CTO, you can look into the future as well. And I'm curious, what does the security landscape look in 5 to 10 years? I mean, listen, we've gone from perimeter defense, nobody would ever get in, to people get in and we have to save our data, and then sorry, we have to get them out, and then we all said, okay, they're going to get in, they're going to do damage. Now, how do we remediate the damage? And then I've also seen going from software to hardware to firmware to side channel. So these risks, if nothing else, have one thing in common, and that's that the bad guys will go in and do an ROI analysis, and that's where they target. And it could change from year to year. So 5 to 10 years out, what do the security risks look like?
Yeah. So two different answers. 5 and 10 are different time horizons in my
Very
world.
much
But
so.
let's start with 5. Okay. So 5 years from now, I am confident that our infrastructures will be built in a multi-cloud topology. It'll be a system of clouds working together. I'm also now confident that many of those cloud infrastructures, primarily the ones that you can control directly, will be operating at a significantly higher level of security, meaning they'll be running zero trust type architectures fully. And what that means is that from a cyber threat landscape, it's not, an enterprise is no longer an enterprise. An enterprise is a collection of infrastructures at various degrees of security,
It's a mesh
and it's a
network
mesh, and
almost.
it's a heterogeneous mesh,
Right.
so which makes it kind of interesting. Which means the bad actors, if you're a bad guy looking at this, you no longer believe that you can get an insertion point through the perimeter and then roam freely, because that won't be possible. What you will have to do is choose where you want to attack. And so
Right.
one of the most important things as people roll out zero trust is it's not going to be everywhere. It's going to be a portion. It might only be 5% of your infrastructure. And so there's this question of, what do you want to put there that is really hard for people to get access to and attack, versus what do you leave in the other places? And so I actually think the security landscape is going to get a little less efficient from the attacker perspective. They're not going to necessarily be able to do a social engineering attack, get your password, come in on your account, and then do lateral movement into your data center and take over your backups. That's just not going to be possible in this
Sure.
architecture. On the other hand, they're maybe going to become much more efficient at saying, I actually don't mine for gold, I mine for tin. I'm basically getting a less valuable attribute, but I'm getting it at a larger scale. And the tool that they're going to use for that is AI. Because right now they are using advanced intelligence, but they're
Right.
not scaling it. And so the thing that I am very concerned about, this was a topic at RSA a few weeks ago, is the bad actors in the security world are inevitably going to start to lean hard into generative AI systems, advanced AI systems, and they're going to shift the entire attack mechanism into that kind of automation. Now, uh, targeting that as a zero trust environment, probably not going to win. It's going to be a very hard effort. But targeting it at all the things that aren't zero trust in the world and doing it highly efficiently is going to give them a potential advantage. The thing that makes me nervous is the other side, because the security industry today, this was again a topic at RSA that it was nice to see us talk about this, is not using AI to do the entire task. We are still constrained by human in the loop by design. We have ethics
Right.
and morality, and we want to make sure that we kind of know what's going on. But if the bad guys are pushing everything into the machines, and we are just building co-pilots around people,
Right.
guess which one's faster? And as the race begins for how you can do broad blast radius attacks on the softer parts of this heterogeneous security landscape, we have to basically be able to protect and react in those environments at the same speed and pace. And so the biggest challenge is, how do we get comfortable moving more and more of the security architecture and behavior into a full machine layer? Because even if we are uncomfortable with that, that's what the bad guys are doing. And it's kind of like, do you want to race a Porsche with a bicycle?
Right.
And that's kind of what it will look like. You'd really like to be in the same class of vehicle if you're in this race. And having a human involved means you aren't, you know?
Yeah, and we're definitely aligned on that. In fact, I finished a write up recently this week where I characterized it as the future is AI spy versus AI spy,
Yeah, exactly.
and we the speed at which we're going to operate
Yeah.
is mind blowing. One thing after having gotten to know you, I don't know if it's 6 or 7 years, eight or something like that, is you're not a futurist. Um, your predictions are grounded in reality. And the fun part is I can go back and look at the predictions that you made. People do this to me
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like to say that I'm not right all the time, but I've been right on the stuff that matters. Even 10 years ago, calling the hybrid multi-cloud, I was in the sheer minority
I was with you.
of that.
we were
Okay.
we were the bad guys.
Exactly. Well, I was not a cloud denier. I mean, I used to be the biggest supplier to the biggest cloud provider. But I really appreciate that a lot of your predictions are grounded in commercial reality and customer reality. So, based on what you said about the future risks in security, what recommendations would you make to Dell customers on what they should be doing?
Yeah, a couple of really tangible ones. The first is really think through what your North Star architecture needs to be. What we did over the last several years. We concluded that the North Star, even if you didn't know how to get there, needed to be this different security paradigm.
Right.
We'll call it zero trust. So if you don't have one of those, then every tactical decision you make today is out of context. Where
Right.
are you going with that decision to buy that widget or to adopt this policy tool? So that would be the first one. The second one is extremely tangible, but it will require time and effort. The path to a better security architecture, whether it's zero trust or multi-cloud security, one of the things that's true is that you have to separate your control plane from your infrastructures. And by control plane, I mean three tasks: identity management, policy management, and threat detection, threat management. Those need to be independent of the infrastructure, because it turns out that if inevitably your infrastructure is going to be a diverse set of cloud infrastructures,
Yes.
including edges and telcos, if you cannot have a consistent concept of identity across them,
Right.
then there is no chance that you can apply security to identity, which is, in fact, the term we use for zero trust is identity becomes the new perimeter. You apply security to an identity, and as the identity moves and exists, the security goes with them. if you don't even have identity worked out, you're in trouble. And we have too many customers today that have fragmented identity strategies. They might have one tool doing device identity, a different one doing user identity. They might be using the native identity management services of a public cloud, but somewhere else it's something else. And so at a minimum, start to get these things independent of your infrastructure, but authoritative over all of them. And that's a journey, but it's something you can do right now. And even before zero trust, one, it will save you money. And two, it gives you a better command and control framework over your heterogeneous infrastructure. The counterforce to this is that everybody selling you an infrastructure wants to sell you all the upstream security services. And that is actually something you should resist. You may want to use one of those, but use them everywhere.
Right.
And that kind of tactic of think about where you want to go and then visualize the technology stack to build it. And for me, it's inevitable that the technology stack is a heterogeneous collection of clouds operating like a system. And one of the layers they have to be consistent about is the security control plane of identity policy and threat management. And so that I made that recommendation actually in December in my, I did a weird thing. Normally at the end of the year, CTOs do predictions, which we can do unbounded. This time I picked things that were New Year's resolutions that you should do right now. And one of them was get your control plane in order. Get to a consistent, separable control plane for your multi-cloud security framework. And if you do that, you are already pre-staging yourself to be able to adopt zero trust and to be able to move into these better architectures.
Yeah, John, this might not be the correct technical term, but I like to consider these hybrid multi-cloud fabrics of sort that cross, and whether it's an application, data, security, maybe there's a zero trust fabric. Otherwise, you're going to be left, every stovepipe has its own separate DevOps sec app.
Go back to that vision of 5 years from now when we have kind of soft targets and hard targets in the enterprise cloud environment. If all of them were under the same control plane, at least you have the ability to move someone out of the soft target into the hard target if you want. And at least you have policy rules that are consistent. And most importantly, you have a consistent threat detection framework so that if you see something being attacked in the soft target, you can optimally move it into a harder environment. The control plane is key to that. And unfortunately, the control plane technologies are fragmented. There's a little chaos there, but there are ways to.
And they're a little bit young. I mean, the public cloud is 19 years old. Okay, and the hybrid multi-cloud, for sake of argument, might be 3 or 4 years old. I mean, it just needs a little bit more maturity to get there. So, John, I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts on security and with some real tangible things to do next, but also giving us this big picture in the future.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here. This is an incredibly important topic that we have now landed both feet on the ground in as Dell. So look forward to
I'll be watching close. I have a security analyst that I know will be doing the double click. And I know after Dell Tech World, he was all over this. So thanks for your time. Thanks. So this is Pat Moorhead, day 3 of the 6.5 Summit. We're talking about security. Stick around. We've got a lot more talks on security. And also, this is time delayed. You can go back and check out day 1 and day 2 of the summit. Wherever you are on the planet, good morning, good afternoon, good night. Take care.